The first thing that stands out in these cases is how ordinary the moments were before everything changed. A quiet trail, a family campsite, a short walk to the water. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested risk. When children disappear in national parks, it rarely begins with panic. It begins with normal life. That is what makes the silence afterward so difficult to understand. Search teams often say the same thing. You expect tracks. You expect sound. You expect at least one clear detail that tells you which direction to go. But in several of these files, the first minutes hold nothing. No movement in the brush. No broken stems. No reply when a parent calls a name that should carry across open ground. Only the space where a child was standing a moment earlier. This series looks at 10 disappearances involving minors inside United States national parks. Each case occurred under different circumstances. Some in daylight, some at night, some within seconds, others across longer gaps of time. The only shared element is the lack of a clear path out. Each environment should have shown something. In many of these incidents, it did not. Before we move into the first file, consider one question that investigators still ask themselves. If a child steps into a visible area and never steps out, how do you begin the search? Which direction do you choose when the ground gives you nothing? If you follow these investigations, stay with the series. It helps the work when more people understand how these cases were recorded and why so little in them adds up. Now we move to the first disappearance. The file begins on a clear afternoon near a family campground in Yellowstone. The terrain was open enough that anyone in the central field could be seen from several angles. The ground was dry, grass short, visibility high. A group of children were playing hide and seek while several adults prepared an early dinner near their vehicles. According to witness statements, the children stayed close to each other. No one wandered toward the tree line. No one left the open field. One boy, 9 years old, entered a shallow ring of shrubs near the fire area. The shrubs were low, less than shoulder height for an adult. Anyone standing nearby could see over them. One child later said he saw the boy crouch down as if finding a hiding spot. The others counted out loud. Several adults heard the counting. There was nothing unusual about it. When the group ran out to find him, they searched the shrubs first. They expected him to jump out. He did not. 2 children circled the ring twice. One adult walked through the center, checking every gap. Another adult called his name from the open side of the field. No sound came back. When they realized they did not see him anywhere in the shrubs, they widened their search by several steps and checked the ground. The soil inside the ring showed light impressions from the children entering. The impressions were shallow, but easy to read in that type of soil. The boy's tracks were visible on the way in. No clear track showed him leaving. There was no disturbed grass on the far side, no broken twigs, no slide marks. The shrubs were soft and would have brushed against clothing if someone pushed through them. None of the branches showed that type of contact. When rangers arrived, they repeated the search pattern, first inside the shrubs, then around them, then outward in measured circles. The visibility across the field remained high. No cover, no terrain drop, no thicket dense enough to hide a child. The initial search lasted less than 20 minutes and produced no direction of travel. By early evening, the incident was logged as an active search. Volunteers checked the tree line. Deputies walked the creek bed 200 yards away. A dog team arrived at dusk and began with a scent article from the family vehicle. The dog pulled toward the shrubs, circled once, and stopped. The handler noted no continuation and no drift toward any quadrant of the field. Darkness came quickly. Floodlights were set up near the campground. Radios reported negative findings through the night. The ground never produced new sign. The shrubs remained the last confirmed point. There were no prints leading out. The file ends the first day with a simple line. No visual, no sound, no direction. The second case begins in the Great Smoky Mountains on a mild morning in early spring. The air was still. The water in the small creek ran slow and clear across rounded stones. A father and his 7-year-old son walked down from their campsite, carrying 2 simple fishing rods and a small box of bait. They planned to spend an hour at the water before the rest of their group woke up. According to the father's statement, the creek was shallow and calm. The banks on both sides were open. No dense brush, no hidden pockets. A place where you could see 30 or 40 yards in either direction without obstruction. They reached the bank at 7:19. The father chose a spot near a large flat stone, while the boy moved a short distance upstream to look for minnows near the edge. The father said he could see him clearly. Light jacket, bright shoes, a small splash when he stepped off the rock to test the water depth. Nothing unusual occurred during those first minutes. Both worked quietly. The father untied a knot in his line. The boy gathered stones to skip across the slow current. At 7:31, the father turned to remove a snag from his reel. The task lasted several seconds. When he looked up, the boy was no longer in sight. He called his name once, then twice. No reply. He walked upstream to the point where the child had been stepping between rocks. The creek was calm. No sudden drop. No deep pool. The water was too shallow to conceal a body and clear enough to see the bottom. The first thing he noticed was the pattern of footprints along the stones. Small wet prints moved in a straight line near the edge. That part was expected. The unusual detail came from the next few impressions spaced farther apart. They did not form a single trail. They spread outward in 3 different directions as if several children had walked there. The father reported this anomaly to the first ranger on scene. The ranger noted in the log that only 1 child had been present. Searchers followed the prints along all 3 directions. Each line ended after several feet. One ended on bare rock, one on soft moss, one on a patch of sand under a low branch. None of the endings showed disturbance consistent with a fall or a run. No drag marks, no broken twigs, no splash pattern on the rocks. The creek surface showed no recent churn of sediment. The father walked the bank repeatedly, calling for his son. Volunteers began arriving from a nearby campsite. They checked both sides of the creek. They looked under overhangs and behind root clusters. No sign. The dog team arrived at 9:20. They took scent from the child's jacket left at the campsite. The lead dog pulled toward the creek, followed the main line of small prints, and then slowed when it reached the first stone where the tracks began to split. It circled twice, tested each path, and sat. The handler noted no clear direction, no scent trail extending along the water, no indication that the child crossed the creek or moved inland. The area was walked multiple times that morning. The water remained clear. The banks remained undisturbed. No items were recovered. The father told searchers the boy had been no more than 15 yards away at all times before the moment he looked down. By early afternoon, the creekside search produced only negative results. A helicopter flew a low pass along the drainage corridor. The observer reported no movement and no reflective surfaces that could belong to the child. The upstream sweep found no clothing and no signs of someone walking through the shallows. The downstream sweep found only older debris caught in branches. At sunset, the first operational day closed. The final entry in the log reads that 3 sets of prints existed where only 1 child had walked, and that no further trace was located beyond the initial cluster. The creek remained quiet. The slope above it showed no break in vegetation. The file ends with no confirmed path out of the area. The third file comes from Yosemite National Park. The incident occurred in a family campground on a night with no wind and only thin cloud cover. The temperature stayed mild through most of the evening. Several families were set up in the same loop. Most had small children. The lights inside the tents went out one by one around 10. Nothing in the log from that night suggests noise or movement that would have stood out. According to the parents' statement, their daughter, 5 years old, went to sleep between them in a 3-person tent. The structure was small. 1 door, 1 mesh window zipped shut from inside. The parents said the child fell asleep quickly. No signs of restlessness, no complaints about the cold. They checked the zipper once before lying down. The mother said she woke briefly around 2:30. She looked toward the entrance and saw no light coming through the fabric. She did not check the child because she felt her breathing and heard nothing unusual. The father reported waking at 4:30. He intended to step outside for water. When he moved his arm toward the center of the tent, he touched only the sleeping bag. The child was not there. He called his wife's name quietly. Both sat up. They checked the inside with a flashlight. The sleeping bag was undisturbed. The pillow had shifted slightly. The zipper on the door was fully closed from the inside. The mesh window was closed as well. They opened the door and looked at the ground around the tent. The soil there was soft with patches of fine dust left from the previous day's heat. No fresh prints showed near the entrance. The parents contacted another family in the adjacent campsite. That family reported hearing nothing. They joined the search. They checked the bathroom structure 70 yards away. They checked the empty campsite across the loop. No movement, no sound. The father then ran to the campground host site and reported a missing child. The host radioed dispatch at 4:54. Rangers were on scene before 5:15. The first ranger documented the entrance area. He noted no disturbance to the soil. The tent fabric showed no tear. The zipper slides moved smoothly. No fibers indicated forced entry. The ranger then checked the immediate perimeter with a flashlight. The ground beyond the tent pad was mixed dirt and pine needles. Pine needles held impressions only under significant weight. None showed the shape of a small foot. The search expanded quickly. Rangers walked all occupied campsites. They called out quietly to avoid waking other families unnecessarily. They checked vehicles. They looked for any sign of a child walking toward the road. The road surface near the loop was clear. Dust along the shoulder held a few tire marks, but no barefoot prints. The logs show a full negative on that sector. A dog team arrived shortly before sunrise. They took scent from the girl's blanket. The lead dog pulled toward the restroom structure, circled once, then returned to the parents' tent. It repeated the same loop twice. The handler noted inconsistent pull and no reliable direction. The dog did not drift toward the tree line or the road. It simply returned to the tent pad. As light increased, volunteers and rangers formed a grid line. They covered the forest edge for several hundred yards. Visibility in that part of Yosemite is good at first light. The shadows are long, but not deep enough to conceal a child. The grid found no fabric, no dropped object, no disturbed brush. The logs show a complete negative in the first 3 sectors. By 8:41, a helicopter was airborne. The pilot flew a slow circle over the campground loop, then followed the drainage line east. The observer reported no color contrast, no movement, no heat signature consistent than the night before. A thin layer of dew settled on the tent pads and picnic tables around the loop. Rangers gathered at the command point near the campground host site. Flashlights moved along the map as the search leader reviewed the sectors cleared during the night. The tent where the child had slept remained the central reference. At 6:12, a new dog team arrived from the county sheriff unit. They used a fresh scent article taken from the inside of the girl's pillowcase. The handler noted a clean acquisition near the tent door. The dog stepped outward, paused, and tested the air. It walked several yards to the east, then turned back. The handler tried again. The dog returned to the tent line and sat. The log records no single pull and no indication of travel in any direction. A group of volunteers began a slow sweep between campsites. They examined fire rings, checked under picnic benches, and looked inside all unlocked bear boxes. One volunteer found a small indentation in the soil near a log behind an unoccupied site. The indentation was shallow, roughly round, too vague to identify. A ranger knelt beside it and pressed his fingers into similar soil. The indentation did not match the pressure of a small foot. It was marked and logged as inconclusive. Rangers then moved toward the lower drainage that ran behind the loop. The ground there was a mix of damp soil and pine debris. Any movement during the night should have left impressions in the moist patches. The team spent 2 hours checking every bend of the drainage. No prints, no signs that someone stepped through the water or brushed against the ferns. The report lists that entire drainage as negative. At 8:40, a brief radio call came from a team farther upslope. They located a small pink object under a cedar root. It turned out to be a piece of plastic from an old toy, weathered and cracked. The parents confirmed it did not belong to their daughter. The item was photographed and dismissed. The search leader then reassigned teams to higher ground. They walked the ridge above the campground, scanning rock shelves and shaded gaps where a child might have sought shelter. The ridge offered a wide view of the valley. No movement was seen below, no shift in the brush. The ridge walk produced no sign, and the sector was cleared before noon. After midday, the temperature rose. The helicopter returned for a second pass. This time, the observer focused on sunlit openings between trees. Heat signatures from rocks were strong, but any human presence would show a distinct shape. None appeared. The helicopter followed the drainage, then circled the campground once more before breaking off. Rangers revisited the tent. They inspected the zipper again. They looked for small fibers that might indicate snagging. None were found. The tent fabric held no tears. The stakes were firm in the soil. No print matched a child's weight near the entrance. The parents repeated their statement. The child had been between them when they fell asleep. They had not heard the zipper move. They had not felt her rise. As afternoon continued, the search radius expanded. Teams walked toward the service road, checking culverts and drainage pipes. They looked under bridges. They checked the empty maintenance yard beyond the trees. No prints, no clothing, no movement. The ground condition should have shown something. It remained clean. At 17:30, the search leader called an end to the second operational day. The debrief noted the absence of any sign outside the tent and the absence of any witness hearing movement during the night. The final line in the day's log reflects the same question raised during briefing. If a child exited the tent, the ground should hold her passing. It did not. The tent remained the only confirmed location. The next case comes from Crater Lake National Park. It occurred on a quiet afternoon along the eastern shoreline, where families often stop to rest before continuing the trail. The weather was stable, light breeze from the water, no heavy chop on the surface. The shoreline in that area is a mix of worn stones and solid volcanic rock. Most sections hold no soil. Tracks are rare unless someone steps in a thin band of sand close to the waterline. 3 families were gathered near a flat shelf of rock. They had been hiking together for several hours. The adults unpacked food and set their bags near the driftwood scattered along the bank. The 11-year-old boy at the center of this file moved a short distance away, looking for stones to skip across the lake. According to multiple statements, he stayed within view at all times during the first part of the stop. Bright shirt, dark shorts, no complaints of fatigue. Nothing in his behavior stood out. At 13:12, one of the adults called to him to stay close to the rocks. He lifted a hand to show he heard. He picked up several flat stones and walked toward a shallow pool formed by a notch in the shore. The notch was narrow but visible from 3 angles. 2 adults watched him step across a set of low stones and stand on the edge of the pool. The water was calm. The boy faced the lake. When the group called him for lunch roughly an hour later, he did not answer. One adult walked down to the notch, expecting to see him near the pool. The shelf was empty. The water was undisturbed. The stones he had gathered were visible at the bottom of the pool. The adult walked out onto the next rock shelf and scanned the shoreline. No movement, no sign of someone walking along the edge. The families formed a small search line and walked both directions. They called his name. They checked behind the larger boulders. They looked for any indication he had climbed up the low slope to the tree line. The slope was open with scattered brush. No break in the vegetation. No snapped stem. No displaced gravel. A ranger arrived at 1423. He walked the immediate shoreline and examined the small patch of sand closest to the pool. A few prints were visible, but indistinct, too shallow for clear identification. Beyond that point, the rock was bare. It held no impressions. The ranger noted that the stones arranged in the pool likely came from the ones the boy had collected earlier. Their position suggested they had been placed underwater. That detail was logged without explanation. The ranger checked the next 30 yards of shoreline and found nothing unusual. The slope above the water held dry needles and light debris. Any shift from a recent climb would have shown disturbance. The log records no disturbance found. At 1541, a dog team arrived. They used a scent article taken from the boy's jacket stored in one of the packs. The dog moved toward the notch, stopped near the pool, and lowered its head toward the water. It then circled in a small radius on the rock shelf. The handler noted limited scent carry and no direction of travel. The dog did not lead up the slope or along the shore. It remained near the pool. A second ranger checked the water depth. The lake shelf at that point dropped steeply after several feet. The clarity should allow visibility of anything caught on the rocks. The ranger recorded no visual contact with any object or clothing beneath the surface. As the afternoon progressed, volunteers expanded the search outward. They walked the slope above the shoreline and checked the trail segment leading away from the water. The trail dust was compact from regular traffic. No small prints matching the boy were visible. The logs show that all points where a child might have moved were checked twice. Shortly before sunset, the helicopter unit arrived. The observer scanned the shoreline for any sign of color contrast. He reported no movement and no reflection from clothing or gear. The shoreline remained quiet. The pool where the boy had stood remained the last confirmed point. The first operational day ended with no trace beyond the initial stones found in the water, and no evidence suggesting where the boy went after standing at the pool. The file marks the shoreline as clear and lists no indication of direction. The second day of the Crater Lake operation began under overcast sky. Light wind cut across the water, but did not disturb the surface near the shoreline. Rangers met at the same rock shelf where the boy had last been seen. The pool where he had stood remained unchanged. The stones underwater had not shifted overnight. No new debris washed in. The search leader marked the area again on the map and assigned teams to expand the perimeter. At 6:40, a ranger walked the upper slope above the shoreline. The ground was a mix of thin soil, pumice, and loose needles. Any uphill travel should have left at least some sign on the softer patches near the roots. The ranger checked each depression and each narrow cut between rocks. The log shows negative findings over that entire section. The first dog team returned with a different handler. They used a fresh scent article from the inside of the boy's pack. The dog pulled toward the water, stopped at the same point near the pool, then stepped onto the next rock shelf and tested the air. It held the position for several seconds, turned once in a tight circle, and sat. The handler recorded the result. No direction, no drift inland, no scent along the shore. A second team was sent along the trail in both directions. They spaced out in pairs, checking the shoulder for impressions. The dust along that trail is coarse and preserves only deep prints. The team found none suggesting the boy had walked away from the shoreline. They checked benches and overlooks. No recent contact signs. The report notes all trail segments near the incident point as clear. Around 8:32, volunteers descended a steep cut leading to a lower rock platform. They inspected the cracks where runoff sometimes collects. No fabric, no small objects, no scrape marks. The edges of the platform held a thin layer of grit that would have shifted if someone had walked near it. The grit remained undisturbed. At 9:10, the helicopter made a slow pass over the eastern quarter of the lake. The observer scanned both shallow and deeper sections. The clarity of the water allowed a view well below the surface. No human figure, no bright color, no unusual shape on the slope underwater. The helicopter then circled the ridge behind the shoreline. No sign of movement. No reflective signal from clothing. By late morning, divers began checking the shallow zone near the shelf. They moved carefully along the drop line. Visibility remained good. They found nothing. No clothing threads, no impact marks, no sign of a fall. The divers reported that the stones at the bottom of the pool formed no pattern consistent with someone slipping. They remained scattered, as if arranged before the water rose. On land, the search continued upslope. A team followed a line of natural steps leading toward a stand of trees. The trees stood on firmer soil. Moss grew along the base of several trunks. Moss holds impressions well. The team found none. They checked broken branches and old fire scars. Nothing suggested a recent passage. Shortly after noon, a ranger discovered a faint scuff on a flat stone 20 yards from the pool. The scuff was small and held no direction. It could have been caused by a boot or by rock movement from weather. The ranger photographed it and logged it as inconclusive. As the afternoon progressed, the search radius extended in a wider arc. Volunteers covered the tree line above the slope and then moved into a thin band of forest. With the canopy light and the undergrowth sparse, the visibility was good. They found no sign of a child seeking cover. No items dropped. No marks on the trunks. No disturbed pine cones. By 1700 hours, the second operational day concluded with no clear indication of where the boy went after standing at the pool. The shoreline remained the last point. The rock shelf showed no evidence of departure. The final entry of the day notes that all probable travel routes were checked and cleared. No ground sign connected the child to any direction beyond the pool. The next case comes from Zion National Park. The trail involved is one of the easier routes in the region. It follows a stable ridgeline for several miles with long stretches of open ground on both sides. Visibility along the trail is generally high. There are no dense pockets of brush near the point recorded in this file. The disappearance occurred late in the morning on a clear day when the trail held steady foot traffic from families and small hiking groups. The girl at the center of this case was 12 years old. She had been hiking with her relatives since early morning. By all accounts, she was familiar with outdoor activity and had no difficulty keeping pace with the adults. According to the statements collected later, she asked to walk a short distance ahead of the group. The relatives allowed her to do so as long as she stayed within view. The trail was straight for a considerable distance and followed a slight downward slope. Anyone walking ahead could be seen without obstruction. At 10:19, a member of the group noted she was still visible. Light jacket, hair tied back, slow but steady pace. The trail bent slightly to the right around a rounded outcrop. The bend did not create a blind corner. Anyone entering it remained visible for several seconds. The group continued at a comfortable pace. They expected to find her waiting at a large flat stone where the trail widened. They had told her to stop there if she reached it first. When they arrived at the flat stone around 10:40, the girl was not present. There were no hikers near the spot. A family of 3 reported passing the stone earlier and seeing no one sitting or standing there. The relatives assumed the girl had continued a short distance ahead. They walked the next 100 yards and called her name. No response. The trail ahead remained empty. They backtracked to the bend. That section of the trail held a thin layer of dust. Several partial prints were visible, but none matched the size of the girl's shoe with any certainty. The dust near the flat stone showed older impressions from the previous day, but nothing fresh enough to confirm her arrival. The slope on both sides of the trail was open with scattered low vegetation. No compression marks appeared in the brush. At 11:11, a ranger arrived and began documenting the last known point. He walked the trail in both directions. No sign of a child stepping off the path. No broken stems. No scuff marks on exposed stone. The ground near the flat stone held no clear prints. The ranger spoke with several hikers who passed through in the previous hour. None reported seeing a child matching the description. A dog team arrived at noon. They used a scent article from a sweater carried in one of the group's packs. The dog pulled toward the bend, moved slowly along the dust line, and then stopped at a section of stone where the trail rose slightly. The handler recorded limited scent continuity and no clear direction. The dog attempted the track again with the same result. It did not follow any path leading off the ridge. Volunteers swept the slopes on both sides. They checked the rocky pockets between shrubs. They scanned the open ground for signs of a child sitting or hiding. The terrain was simple to search. Visibility extended for dozens of yards in most directions. No movement was observed. No clothing. No disturbed soil. No prints leading downhill. The search widened along the ridge. 2 teams moved north. 2 moved south. They covered the exposed ledges and stand of pines farther up the trail. The response was quick, and the trail remained active with other hikers who were questioned as they passed. None had seen a child walking alone. None heard a call or cry. The trail remained as it had been earlier in the day, dry, bright, open. By mid-afternoon, the search extended beyond the initial ridge. A helicopter scanned the slope below the bend and the flat stone. The observer reported no sign of movement, no color contrast that could indicate clothing, no heat signature under the sparse canopy. The helicopter moved on to the next ridge and returned with the same result. Near sunset, the search leader closed the first operational period. The final log entry for the day states that the girl was last seen walking toward a bend in full view of her relatives, and that no evidence was located beyond that point. All probable travel lines along the ridge were cleared. The direction of departure remained unknown. The second day of the Zion operation opened with clear skies and steady light over the ridge. The air was cool at first light, but warmed quickly. Rangers met near the flat stone where the girl had been expected to wait. The search leader reviewed the previous day's negative findings and reassigned sectors based on the lack of ground sign. The bend remained the last point where any member of the group had seen her. At 6:42, a tracking specialist walked the trail segment again. He checked dust conditions along the bend, the small rises, and the patches of exposed stone. The dust from the previous day had settled overnight. Any fresh prints made after sunset would have been visible. None appeared. The specialist knelt several times to test the surface. The impressions from hikers earlier that morning showed clearly. None matched the size or tread pattern associated with the girl. Rangers then moved toward the slope on the east side of the ridge. This slope was gentler and held scattered clumps of grass. Grass bends easily under weight. The team spent an hour checking each cluster. The log shows no impressions, no broken stems, and no tracks leading away from the trail. One ranger noted a small displacement of gravel, but determined it was likely caused by runoff during the night. At 8:10, a dog team arrived. They used a scent article taken from the inside lining of the girl's jacket. The dog acquired scent immediately and pulled toward the bend. It stepped several yards down the trail, paused at the same stone surface where the previous team recorded scent loss, and stopped. The handler attempted a restart from the flat stone. The dog followed the trail back to the bend, circled once, and sat. No pull downhill. No drift toward the ridge crest. A volunteer group began sweeping the west side of the ridge. This area dropped more sharply, but held pockets of stable ground where a child might have stepped. The volunteers checked each pocket with hand signals to maintain spacing. They moved slowly, scanning for color contrast or signs of disturbance. They found none. The slope did not show any line of travel. Around 9:30, a hiker approached the command point and reported seeing a small shape near a juniper cluster earlier that morning. Rangers walked to the spot immediately. The shape turned out to be a piece of fabric caught on a branch. The fabric was weathered, faded, and unrelated to the incident. The hiker's statement was logged and the area cleared. By late morning, the search expanded farther along the trail in both directions. A 2-person team walked north and questioned hikers coming from higher elevations. None reported seeing a child alone. None recalled hearing anything unusual. The trail surface remained consistent. Dust held clear prints from hikers who passed earlier that morning. None matched the girl's size. At 11:50, the helicopter unit returned. The observer ran a thermal scan along both sides of the ridge. Rock surfaces produced high readings, but no human-shaped signatures appeared under the shrubs or in the shallow depressions. The helicopter then flew a wider arc to the northwest, checking natural shelves and outcrops. The report notes negative findings across all passes. After midday, rangers searched a narrow side trail that branched off the main path. The trail saw limited use and held loose sand in several sections. The sand showed only 2 sets of adult prints from that morning, no smaller prints. The side trail ended at a small overlook. The overlook was clear, and the sand around it held no indication anyone had stepped there overnight. The search leader then ordered a contour sweep 1 level below the ridge. Teams spaced out along the slope. They walked slowly beneath overhangs and through scattered brush. The brush was thin and held dry leaves that would shift easily if stepped on. No shifts were observed. A ranger found 1 shallow depression in the dirt, but the outline was too broad and lacked tread. It was logged as inconclusive. By late afternoon, the operation shifted back to the bend for a final review. The search leader walked the section personally. He checked the dust, the exposed stone, and the slope on both sides. No new signs had developed throughout the day. No hikers had reported seeing a child. No dog had indicated a reliable direction. The disappearance remained anchored to the short stretch of trail visible to the girl's relatives only hours before. The second operational day closed with the same finding as the first. Last confirmed sighting at the bend. No evidence of travel beyond it. The file notes that all terrain features within probable reach had been cleared, and that no path out could be confirmed. The next case comes from Glacier National Park. The incident took place in a developed campground with marked sites, level ground, and clear lines of sight between the facilities. The morning was cool. Thin fog drifted near the trees but did not cover the central loop. Several families were already awake. Coffee boiled on small stoves. A few early hikers passed along the service path. Nothing unusual was reported during the first hour of daylight. The boy involved in this file was 8 years old. He had been camping with his father. Their tent stood near the lower restroom building. According to the father's statement, the boy woke early and said he needed to go to the restroom. The father pointed to the small concrete structure less than 40 meters away. He watched the boy walk across the flat gravel and enter the building. The father then turned back to secure a loose strap on their cooler. The boy was inside the restroom for several minutes. When the father walked over to check on him, he found the interior empty. The door had not been latched. The lights were still on. No sound came from the stalls. The father walked back outside and scanned the loop. No movement. No small figure running between sites. He called the boy's name twice. No answer. A nearby camper reported seeing the boy enter the building, but did not see him exit. Another camper seated near a fire ring said she heard the restroom door creak once, but did not see anyone step out. The father checked behind the structure. The ground there was a mix of damp soil and pine needles. No fresh prints showed in the soil. The needles were undisturbed. At 7:21, a ranger arrived. He examined the restroom interior. All stalls were empty. All windows were intact. No footprints appeared on the clean tile floor. The ranger stepped outside and checked the gravel. Gravel typically shifts under weight. The area immediately in front of the doorway showed only older impressions from the previous day. No small prints. No marks suggesting a child had stepped onto the gravel and walked away. The ranger then checked the narrow strip of grass between the restroom and the nearest campsite. The grass held dew. Dew preserves movement well. Any step should have flattened it. No flattened patches were visible. The ranger recorded a negative finding. At 7:52, a dog team arrived. They used a scent article from the boy's sweatshirt. The dog acquired scent and moved toward the restroom. It circled once outside the doorway, entered, walked to the far corner, then returned to the entrance. The handler attempted a restart from the gravel. The dog repeated the same pattern and sat. No outward track. No indication of movement toward any campsite. Volunteers began checking tents and vehicles in the loop. They looked under tables and in bear boxes. They walked the short trail leading to the lake overlook. The trail dust held several partial adult prints. No smaller impressions were present. The overlook was clear. No one reported hearing a child's voice. By 9:40, the search expanded beyond the campground. Rangers followed the road in both directions. They checked the shoulder for impressions. The shoulder dust was soft from rain earlier in the week. No prints matching the boy appeared. They then checked the drainage ditch parallel to the road. The ditch held standing water. No disturbance, no slide marks, no tracks. A two-person team swept the tree line behind the campground. The low branches of spruce trees often hold small broken tips if someone brushes past. None were broken. The ground beneath the trees was level and covered in old needles. No fresh impressions. No sign that a child had stepped under the canopy. At midday, the helicopter unit made a pass over the campground. The observer scanned the restrooms, the loop, and the shallow forest beyond. He reported no movement and no heat signature hidden behind any of the structures. The helicopter then flew a wider circle. The open meadow south of the loop showed no sign of a small figure moving through the grass. Rangers spent the afternoon checking culverts, storage structures, and the service yard. No evidence linked the boy to any of these areas. The restroom remained the last confirmed location. The doorway remained the central point where expected sign had not appeared. The first operational period for this incident closed at 1750. The final log entry notes that no track led out from the restroom, no witness saw the child exit, and no print was located on ground that should have held at least one clear impression. The direction of movement remained unknown. The second operational day in Glacier began in low light. Fog settled against the tops of the trees, but left the campground clear. Rangers gathered near the restroom building before sunrise and reviewed the previous day's findings. The absence of tracks on gravel, soil, or dew-covered grass remained the primary unresolved detail. The search leader marked new sectors on the map and assigned teams to widen the perimeter. At 6:30, a tracking specialist examined the gravel again. He sifted several small patches with a gloved hand. Gravel normally shifts under even light steps, leaving subtle displacements. None of the displacements matched a small foot. Only older impressions from the previous afternoon appeared. The specialist extended his inspection to the strip of grass where dew had settled thick overnight. No flattened blades, no narrow channels made by running feet. The grass held only its natural bend. Rangers then checked the restroom interior once more. The tile floors remained clean. No smudges on the walls. The windows stayed locked from inside. The ranger who performed the check logged that no surface showed new contact marks. The building was cleared again. At 7:15, a dog team conducted a full restart using a fresh scent article. The dog acquired scent quickly and pulled toward the doorway. It circled once inside, lowered its head near the far wall, and returned to the entrance. The handler attempted a second restart from the side of the building. The dog repeated the same tight pattern and stopped. The handler recorded limited scent carry and no direction. Two volunteers began checking the road east of the campground. They followed the shoulder for nearly half a mile. The dust was soft from overnight moisture. Footprints from early hikers appeared clearly. None matched a small shoe. A ranger walked parallel to them on the opposite side. He checked the slope above the drainage ditch. No disturbed soil. No slide marks. No broken vegetation. By 8:40, a larger search group formed a line along the edge of the forest behind the restroom building. They advanced slowly, maintaining equal spacing. Each volunteer checked the ground for color change, displaced needles, or new depressions. The forest floor remained undisturbed. A few older animal tracks crossed the path, but none showed the precise edges of a recent print made by a child. A ranger discovered a shallow indentation under a fir branch. It was small, but lacked any clear outline. The soil around it was dry enough that the indentation could have been caused by a falling pine cone. It was photographed and marked as inconclusive. The search continued without new findings. By 10:10, the helicopter unit returned. The observer scanned the surrounding forest below the ridgeline. Light wind moved the upper branches, but did not disturb the view of the clearings. No heat signatures resembling a child appeared. The helicopter flew a longer arc across the valley, checking old fire roads and small meadows. All negative. Shortly after 11, a pair of hikers reported seeing a small figure near the service yard earlier in the morning. Rangers moved to the yard immediately. They checked behind stacked lumber, inside open sheds, and along the fence line. The gravel showed only adult prints and tire marks. The hikers said the figure had been distant and partly obscured. After reviewing the area, the ranger logged the statement as unresolved and the sector as clear. Around midday, the search widened toward the lake trail. A two-person team checked the overlook again. They scanned the water. No movement. No clothing caught on driftwood. The path leading to the overlook held the same adult prints as the previous day, with no smaller impressions mixed among them. The search leader then ordered a sweep of the campground from end to end. Volunteers knocked on camper doors to confirm no child had been found sleeping or wandering. All returned negative. Rangers checked dumpsters, storage boxes, and unoccupied sites. No evidence linked the boy to any point outside the restroom area. In late afternoon, a ranger retraced the child's original path from the tent to the building. The gravel remained unchanged. No prints leading in the opposite direction. The tent pad held no additional impressions. The father repeated his statement. He had watched the boy enter the building. He had not seen him come out. As the second operational period ended, the search leader noted that all sectors within probable distance of a child traveling on foot had been cleared with no sign found. The restroom remained the only confirmed location. The lack of tracks leading out remained unexplained. The next file comes from Rocky Mountain National Park. The incident occurred during a brief afternoon storm. The weather shifted without warning. Clouds moved in fast from the west and dropped a short but heavy burst of rain across a broad section of trail. Families took shelter under wooden picnic structures and natural overhangs. The rain lasted less than 20 minutes. When it cleared, the trail surface became slick in some spots and muddy in others. Visibility returned quickly. The girl in this case was 10 years old. She was with her parents at a sheltered rest area near a bend in the trail. Several other families gathered there during the rain. According to the parents' statements, their backpacks and some gear had been left outside the shelter when the storm began. When the rain eased, the girls stepped out to retrieve one of the packs they had left under a pine. The pine stood less than 15 meters from the shelter. Anyone standing at the edge of the structure could see the trunk. The father watched her walk toward the tree. She took slow steps because the ground was slippery. She reached the pack and bent to lift it. Lightning flashed at that moment somewhere up the valley. The father said the flash briefly altered his vision. When he looked again, the girl was no longer at the pine. The pack was still on the ground. The tree trunk was visible. No one stood near it. Rain had softened the soil around the pine. Mud held footprints clearly. Several small impressions were visible where the girl had stood. The impressions showed a simple pattern. Approach, pause, bend. No prints led away. The mud in every direction remained smooth except for rain marks. No sign of running. No sign of dragging. No sign of a partial step beginning any route out. The parents called her name. Several families joined them. They checked behind the pine and the low rocks nearby. They checked the shallow ditch where rainwater collected. The ditch was clear. The water inside it held no debris, no ripples, nothing that suggested recent disturbance. A ranger arrived at 15:32. He documented the prints near the pine. The mud still held their shape. He marked the outer perimeter and began a slow outward search with 2 volunteers. They checked the brush. The storm had dampened everything. Any contact with branches or stems would have left moisture patterns. No such patterns were visible. At 16:20, a dog team arrived. They used a scent article from the girl's jacket. The dog pulled strongly toward the pine. It lowered its nose to the mud. It then turned in a small circle, stepped several feet toward the shelter, stopped, and returned to the pine. The handler noted uncertain scent continuation and limited drift. A second attempt yielded the same result. Rangers examined the trail leading westward. The mud on that side was firm enough to retain clear impressions from hikers who passed after the storm. Smaller prints consistent with a child did not appear among them. Rangers checked the opposite direction. The ground conditions were similar. Adult prints and older marks from before the storm. No fresh, small prints. By evening, the search extended to both sides of the trail. One group walked the slope below the shelter. The soil there was softer. The rain had pooled in places, leaving thin layers of silt. The silt remained unbroken. If a child had stepped there, the marks would have been sharp. None appeared. Another group climbed the slope above the trail. The rocks were slick and held damp patches. They checked each crevice and overhang. Nothing indicated recent movement. No footprints on the ledges. No disturbed gravel. The helicopter unit arrived at 1840. The observer scanned the valley. Tree branches still shed water, but the ground beneath them remained visible in places. No heat signatures appeared near the rocks or along the slope. The helicopter widened its circle. No movement, no bright clothing, no signs of shelter. The rain stopped long before sunset. The prints near the pine remained clear until they darkened under evening shade. By 1950, the search leader called an end to the first operational period. The final log entry states that the child was last observed lifting a pack under a pine, and that the prints ended at that point with no sign leading away. All probable routes were walked and remained negative. The second operational day in Rocky Mountain National Park opened in cooler air, left behind by the storm. Thin fog settled low across the slope, but lifted quickly once sunlight reached the trees. Rangers gathered near the shelter where the families had waited out the rain. The ground around the pine remained damp. The prints made by the girl the previous afternoon had softened overnight, but still held their shape. No new impressions had formed beside them. At 6:50, a tracking specialist examined the mud again. He used a small ruler to confirm depth and spacing. The prints showed clear entry, but no continuation. The surrounding mud had dried enough that any new movement would have left a distinct edge. None appeared. The specialist extended his search outward, testing each patch of exposed soil. All negative. Rangers then walked the area behind the pine where rainwater had collected. The ditch still held shallow standing water. The surface was smooth. No sediment displacement. No new ripples. A ranger used a flashlight to check beneath the small overhang formed by a fallen branch. Nothing showed beneath it. At 7:20, a dog team performed a full restart. They used a different scent article taken from the girl's hat. The dog acquired scent immediately and moved to the pine. It lowered its head to the softened prints, followed the line of impressions, and returned to the same point where the previous team had lost direction. The handler attempted a second start on the opposite side of the pine. The dog repeated the same pattern and sat. The handler logged that the scent did not carry beyond the single set of prints. A volunteer group began sweeping the slope below the trail. The soil there varied between damp clay and thin gravel. Both surfaces should have shown any recent contact. The volunteers checked under thick brush and around scattered boulders. The clay held shallow animal tracks from early morning, but no small human prints. The gravel held no disturbances. By 8:40, the helicopter unit made a slow pass along the valley. The observer scanned the slope where runoff had cut small channels in the soil. These channels often reveal recent movement because water exposes fresh earth. None showed any sign resembling a child's passage. The helicopter widened the arc to include a cluster of trees on a narrow ridge. No heat signature. No movement. Rangers then worked the upper slope again. The incline was moderate, covered in loose stones and patches of damp moss. Moss compresses easily under weight. Any step would leave a distinct, darker mark. The rangers checked each patch. No fresh compression appeared. They looked behind the larger rocks. They scanned narrow gullies formed by erosion. The gullies were clear. Around 10:15, a hiker approached the command point and reported hearing a single short sound earlier. He described it as a quick cry, but could not identify distance or direction. Rangers checked the nearest drainage and the cluster of high rocks where sound echoes. Both areas showed no sign of recent passage. The hiker's statement was logged as unverified. At midday, the search leader ordered a grid sweep of the forest beyond the trail. Volunteers spaced out in a straight line and advanced slowly. They checked tree wells, deadfall, and depressions. The ground was mixed with pine needles and damp soil. Needles shift underfoot even in light steps. None of the shifts resembled a child's pattern. The grid concluded with negative findings. The team assigned to the shelter area examined all items left during the storm. The pack the girl had attempted to lift remained near the pine. The fabric was damp but intact. No marks indicated that it had been dragged or lifted after the disappearance. No small objects belonging to the girl were discovered nearby. In late afternoon, the search wrapped back to the pine for one more evaluation. The specialist checked the edges of the prints again. Overnight, drying clarified the shapes even more. The entry prints remained sharp. They ended abruptly in the same position. No half print, no pivot, no shift in weight. Only the single line showing arrival. The second operational period closed at 18:20. The final log entry reflects what the search leader repeated to the teams. The last confirmed point held clear approach prints. No evidence of departure was found in any sector. All surrounding ground that should have shown movement remained undisturbed. The route the child might have taken out of that area could not be identified. The next case comes from Sequoia National Park. The incident took place along a shallow creek that runs behind a popular day-use area. The water there is slow in late summer. The depth rarely reaches higher than a child's knee. Families often stop to let their children wade, while adults set up small picnics nearby. The banks are gradual and open. Visibility across the creek bed is usually wide and unobstructed. The two children in this file were siblings. The older sister was 12. The younger brother was 6. They had been playing near the water while their parents organized food at a table a short distance away. According to the parents' statement, the creek was calm. The sound of the water was low. The siblings stayed within the same 30-yard section of the bank for nearly 20 minutes. Witnesses recalled the boy stepping from stone to stone along the edge while the girl followed several paces behind. The parents said the children laughed and spoke to each other. Nothing suggested tension or distress. The father later said he turned away for less than a minute to move a cooler into the shade. When he looked back, he saw only his daughter standing in the creek. She said her brother had gone ahead to look for a flatter stone. The girl pointed toward a bend only a few yards upstream. The bend did not conceal anything. The water remained shallow. The stones were flat and widely spaced. The father called his son's name. No reply. He walked to the bend and looked beyond it. The creek continued in a straight line for several yards. No movement. No small figure crouched behind any stone. The mother joined him, and they began checking both banks. The mud on the left bank held several prints from the children earlier in the day. The right bank held mostly dry pockets of sand. The mother reported that the boy's prints looked normal up to a certain stone, and then stopped. Mud showed the shape of the last step. No follow-up print showed a second step leading forward. No print showed a sideways move. A ranger arrived at 13:20. He documented the last print on the left bank. The print was clean. He noted the expected direction of travel, but the mud held no further impressions. The ranger stepped into the creek to check the stones. Algae had formed a slippery layer. Any recent step would have left a visible disturbance. None appeared. The water was too shallow to conceal movement. No ripples suggested someone had walked through minutes earlier. At 13:50, a dog team reached the scene. They used a scent article taken from the boy's jacket. The dog led to the left bank, moved to the water's edge, and stepped onto the nearest stone. It sniffed the surface, circled once in a tight radius on the same stone, and then moved upstream several feet. It paused, turned toward a second stone, and stopped. The handler noted that the dog did not pull beyond that point. The scent appeared to weaken at the waterline. A second attempt produced the same limited pattern. Volunteers searched the opposite bank. They checked the low brush and the dry patches under overhanging branches. The ground under the brush was soft. No compression marks, no drag marks, no clothing. The brush tips were intact. No sign that a child had passed through. By mid-afternoon, rangers widened the search along both sides of the creek. They walked several hundred yards upstream. The water remained calm. The stones remained undisturbed. In the wider pools, there were no clothing fragments or small objects floating. The banks on both sides showed no small prints, only older adult impressions from earlier hikers. Downstream teams checked a cluster of logs caught in a shallow channel. They searched beneath each log and between the roots of a fallen tree. The water was clear. No sign of the boy. The logs held no fresh marks. The channel bed held silt with no clear prints. Around 1640, a hiker approached and reported that he had seen the siblings earlier, but had not noticed any unusual movement near the bend. His statement matched what the parents and sister reported. The ranger logged the note, and the hiker continued on the trail. At 1720, rangers completed a slow sweep through the open field beyond the creek. The field grass was tall in places and flattened in others from earlier visitors. No small child's path stood out. No disrupted line through the grass indicated running or hiding. The first operational day ended with the last confirmed point on a single muddy step, and no further sign of the child's movement upstream or down. The creek stayed calm. The ground that should have shown his passage remained undisturbed. The file closes the day with no direction established. The second operational day in Sequoia began under steady morning light. The creek ran quiet. Overnight cooling had lowered the water level by a small margin, revealing more of the stones near the bend. Rangers returned to the last confirmed point on the left bank. The single clear print remained visible in the mud. Its edges had softened slightly, but still showed the outline of a small shoe. No new impressions had formed around it during the night. At 6:40, a tracking specialist examined both banks. He moved slowly along the left side first. The mud farther upstream held a smooth surface, broken only by runoff marks from the previous evening. No new prints, no disturbances to the thin algae line near the water's edge. He crossed to the right bank. The dry sand formed a crust overnight. Any movement would have cracked the surface. The crust remained unbroken in all directions. Rangers then checked the stones in the creek bed. The water was clear enough that each surface could be seen easily. The stones retained a thin layer of algae. Stepping on the algae would leave a visible streak. None of the streaks resembled a fresh impression. The ranger who checked the stones reported a full negative for all surfaces within 15 yards, upstream and downstream. At 7:30, a dog team performed a restart with a second scent article taken from the boy's hat. The dog pulled toward the left bank again, reached the first stone, circled once, and stepped toward the next rock upstream. It lowered its head, paused, and returned to the first stone. The handler logged the behavior as consistent with limited scent retention near the water and no reliable direction. Volunteers formed a grid on the downstream side where the creek widened. They walked in parallel lines from the bank toward the open field. They checked depressions, low brush, and the narrow gaps beneath downed limbs. Several small animal tracks crossed the field. None matched the scale or pattern of a human child's step. The grass showed no fresh bends or channels. At 9:14, the helicopter unit arrived. The observer began scanning the length of the creek. The water remained smooth. Rocks and roots created minor shadows, but nothing resembling a human form. The helicopter then flew a wider arc over the forest edge. The canopy was thin in this section of the park. Light reached the ground in many places. No movement appeared beneath the trees. A ranger and 2 volunteers moved farther upstream into a section where the banks narrowed. If the child had walked beyond the bend, this section would have forced him into the mud or onto the stones. Both surfaces should have shown contact. The mud remained undisturbed. The stones held no skid marks or broken algae patterns. The team spent 40 minutes in that sector. No sign emerged. Shortly after 10, a new volunteer group began checking the path that led away from the creek toward a picnic area. The path held dry gravel. Gravel shifts under light weight. The team found only adult prints and tire marks near the tables. They checked under each table and inside an empty storage box. All clear. At 11:30, a hiker reported hearing a splash earlier, but said it could have been a branch falling. Rangers checked the pool downstream where the sound might have originated. The pool was shallow. The silt at the bottom remained smooth. No disturbed sediment. No debris matching children's clothing. By midday, the search extended into the forest above the creek. Volunteers walked through scattered pines spaced widely apart. Pine needles covered the ground. Needles often shift when stepped on. None of the clusters showed fresh disturbance. The search leader ordered a slow sweep of a nearby ridge. Visibility from the ridge was good. The creek and the field below could be seen clearly. No movement was reported. In late afternoon, a ranger performed a final check of the last confirmed print. He measured the depth and compared it to soil consistency at several points nearby. The print remained sharper than the surrounding patches. It remained the single clear impression. No half-step indicated departure. No pattern showed a shift in footing. At 18:10, the search leader ended the second operational period. The final log entry notes that all likely travel routes had been examined, that no prints leading away from the creek had been found, and that no disturbance upstream or downstream indicated a path of movement. The last known point stood on one muddy step. The ground beyond it remained silent. The next case comes from Acadia National Park. The trail involved is short, well-marked, and popular with families. Visibility along most of its length is unobstructed. Low shrubs line the sides. Sections of exposed granite form natural steps. The incident occurred in early afternoon with steady light and no haze. Temperatures were mild. No heavy foot traffic at the time. The subject in this file was a 14-year-old boy hiking with his mother. Witnesses stated that the two appeared to be speaking quietly near the base of the trail. According to the mother's later statement, they had a brief disagreement about the route. The boy decided to walk ahead. He was familiar with short hikes and had visited the park before. He told his mother he would wait at a marked overlook point several minutes up the trail. At 13:26, the mother saw him moving along the trail. His pace was normal. He carried no pack. He reached a low granite rise and walked over it. The rise was not tall enough to conceal someone for more than a few seconds. Anyone cresting it becomes visible again on the opposite slope almost immediately. The mother continued walking at a steady speed. When she reached the top of the rise, the trail ahead was empty. She called his name. No answer. She walked to the overlook. The overlook is a flat granite shelf with open exposure on 3 sides. She checked its edges. She checked the small cluster of shrubs just beyond it. The shelf was empty. No one was seated or lying down. No movement in the brush. A hiker approaching from the opposite direction reported seeing no boy on the trail during that time. Another family descending the same path said they had passed the overlook minutes earlier and had seen no one there. Their statements indicated that if the boy had reached the shelf, he would have been visible to them. The mother returned to the granite rise. The dust on that section of trail was thin and broke easily underfoot. Her own prints showed clearly. No small prints appeared beside hers. The granite itself held no smudge or dust transfer, suggesting someone had stepped off to either side. Both edges of the rise sloped gently downward with scattered gravel. Gravel showed no fresh displacement. A ranger arrived at 14:11. He walked the trail from the rise to the overlook, checking each patch of dust. The dust revealed older prints from earlier hikers. but none from a smaller shoe consistent with the boy. The ranger then checked the brush above the trail. The branches showed no broken tips. The soil beneath them was thin and would have held at least some trace of movement. It held none. At 14:40, a dog team reached the scene. They used a scent article from the boy's hoodie tied to the mother's pack. The dog acquired scent and moved to the granite rise. It stepped forward several yards, lost the trail, and circled. The handler attempted a restart from the overlook. The dog walked to the edge, tested the air, and returned to the rise. The handler recorded no reliable direction and no continuous scent line. By mid-afternoon, volunteers swept the lower side of the slope. This area held pockets of soil between granite blocks. Soil of this type retains recent impressions well. The team checked each pocket. No small prints, no drag marks, no broken seedlings. The slope was quiet. A second group searched the upper side of the trail. They moved through sparse undergrowth. Pine needles covered the ground. Needles often shift if stepped on. None of the clusters showed fresh disturbance. The team scanned the narrow gaps between granite slabs. Nothing indicated recent movement. At 16:50, the helicopter arrived. The observer scanned both sides of the slope. Granite surfaces reflected light, but shadows remained steady. No movement appeared under the small firs at the edge of the ridge. The helicopter followed the trail corridor for several hundred yards. No heat signatures, no color contrast, no cluster of clothing near the rocks. The mother remained near the overlook as the search continued. She repeated her statement to the ranger. The boy had reached the rise ahead of her. She had expected to see him again within seconds. She did not. No sound followed. No indication suggested he had left the trail. The rise remained the last confirmed point. At sunset, the search leader closed the first operational period. The final log entry notes that the boy was last observed walking over the granite rise, and that no evidence of his passage was located beyond it. All likely routes showed negative results. The direction of movement remained undetermined. The second operational day in Acadia began before first light reached the granite ridge. The air was still. Low clouds held a dim gray band over the trail. Rangers gathered near the granite rise and reviewed the previous day's notes. The search leader emphasized the absence of any confirmed prints between the rise and the overlook. That absence guided the day's assignments. At 6:30, a tracking specialist inspected the dust on the rise again. Overnight moisture had not fully settled on the exposed surfaces. The dust remained loose and dry. Any movement during the night would have broken the surface. The specialist found no new impressions. He marked the edges of the rise and checked the gravel runoff on both sides. The gravel showed no fresh slide marks, no signs of activity. Rangers then moved toward the overlook. They checked the flat granite shelf. The surface was clean. No scratch marks, no shifted loose grit. The ranger examining the edge noted that recent foot traffic normally leaves faint dust smears on the rock face. None appeared. The shelf held only older weathered markings. At 7:10, a dog team conducted a restart using a scent article from inside the boy's backpack, which had been left at the base of the trail. The dog acquired scent and moved toward the rise. It stepped into the dust, tested the air, and drifted toward the overlook. The handler noted hesitation. The dog walked the length between the 2 points, circled twice near the overlook, and returned to the rise. The handler recorded limited continuity and no clear direction. A volunteer team swept the area below the trail. They moved carefully, checking the narrow pockets of soil between granite blocks. Soil of this type reveals movement clearly. The volunteers found only older animal tracks, no small human prints. They examined low brush. Branches showed no breakages, no caught fibers. The ground beneath remained undisturbed. At 8:22, a ranger checked a narrow side path leading toward a cluster of firs. The path held a thin layer of organic debris. A fresh pass would have created visible scattering. None was present. He checked under the fir branches. The floor beneath held pine needles that had settled uniformly. no depressions, no scuffs. The path was logged as clear. The helicopter unit arrived at 9. The observer focused on the slope below the granite rise. Light wind pushed small shadows through the trees. No movement appeared beneath the canopy. The helicopter then shifted toward the higher shelf beyond the overlook. The observer scanned the exposed granite and the thin scrub along the ridge. All negative. By late morning, a wider search line formed. Volunteers and rangers spaced out along the forest edge below the ridge. They walked slowly through thin undergrowth, scanning depressions near tree wells. The tree wells were clear, no signs of someone stepping into or resting inside them. The line continued across a small drainage. The drainage bed held fine silt. The silt surface remained smooth. No footprints. At 11:50, a hiker reported seeing a small figure earlier near a boulder field east of the trail. Rangers moved to the field. They checked gaps between boulders, scanned the shadowed crevices, and inspected the loose gravel. The gravel there shifted easily, even under light pressure. No fresh shifts were visible. The boulder gaps held no clothing, no objects, no disturbed dust. The hiker later said the figure could have been an animal moving quickly. His report was logged as inconclusive. In early afternoon, rangers repeated checks on the rise. They expanded their search several yards uphill. The slope held patches of moss. Moss darkens under compression. Each patch showed undisturbed growth. Rocks nearby held no new grit displacement. A ranger placed his boot near one of the patches to compare weight distribution. The contrast between disturbed and undisturbed moss was clear. Nothing matching a small foot was present. By 15:20, a second helicopter pass swept the entire ridge. The observer noted that sun exposure had increased contrast on the granite. Even with improved visibility, no trace of a person appeared across the ridgeline or the lower forest. The helicopter logged another negative. The mother remained near the overlook through the afternoon. Rangers confirmed her original statement again. The boy had been visible at the rise. He had not been out of view long enough to move beyond either flank of the trail. The distance between the rise and the overlook was short. The terrain on both sides was open enough that any movement should have left trace. None had. As the second operational period ended at 17:40, the search leader noted that all primary and secondary sectors had been cleared with no evidence of the boy's passage. The trail corridor produced no prints. The surrounding terrain produced no disturbance. The last confirmed point remained the granite rise. No direction of movement could be established. The next case comes from Arches National Park. The incident occurred near one of the smaller natural arches along a well-used trail. The terrain around that arch is open sandstone with scattered pockets of soft sand. Visibility in the area is generally good. Afternoon light creates long shadows, but does not fully conceal movement. Several families were present at the time. Some were taking photos. Others were seated along the flatter stones near the base of the arch. The subject in this file was an 8-year-old boy. He had been hiking with his parents and an older sibling. According to multiple witness statements, the family stopped near the arch to take pictures. The boy moved a short distance to the side, where a slanted boulder provided partial shade. He stood near the boulder while the parents adjusted their camera. The father stated that he saw the boy in the frame briefly, before instructing everyone to stand closer together. The boy stepped out of the frame. The next photograph taken seconds later did not include him. At 15:37, the parents realized he was no longer beside the boulder. They walked to the shade line where he had stood. No footprints appeared in the soft sand just beyond the rock. Only older partial prints from earlier visitors remained. The sand closest to the boulder was undisturbed. No small impressions. No signs of running or stepping away. A couple seated nearby reported that they had seen the boy walk into the shaded area, but had not noticed him leaving. They said the space behind the boulder was open and visible. No narrow gap. No hidden crevice. A ranger later confirmed that the rear of the boulder opened into a broad sandstone shelf with no cover. At 15:51, the first ranger arrived. He checked the sand surface around the boulder. The sand formed a thin crust in several places due to heat. A fresh step would break the crust. None of the breaks matched the boy's size or shoe tread. The ranger then checked the sandstone shelf. The sandstone held only faint dust trails from earlier groups. No new trails leading outward. A dog team arrived at 16:20. The handler used a scent article taken from the boy's hat. The dog moved toward the boulder, tested the sand, stepped onto the flat stone beyond, circled twice, and stopped. The handler attempted a restart farther up the trail. The dog drifted back to the same shaded area and sat. The handler logged no clear direction. Rangers then moved down slope. They checked pockets of sand between exposed stone. These pockets usually show clean impressions of recent travel. None contained prints matching a child. A set of adult prints crossed one pocket. A smaller indentation appeared near them, but lacked tread detail and did not match the boy's shoe pattern. It was logged as inconclusive. At 17:20, the helicopter unit arrived. The observer scanned the shelf, the base of the arch, and the trails leading away. Afternoon heat created thermal haze, but did not obstruct visibility near the rocks. The observer reported no sign of a child in any direction. The helicopter made one wide arc around the formation and returned to the staging area. By evening, rangers extended the search across the open sandstone beyond the arch. They walked slowly, checking cracks and shallow depressions. The terrain offered no place for concealment and no significant drop-offs within the initial perimeter. The sandstone was checked for disturbed dust. None of the markings were recent. No tracks indicated movement uphill or downhill. At 18:15, a hiker approached the command point to report having taken photos near the arch during the same time window. The ranger reviewed the images. The photos showed the family near the boulder. The first image captured the boy standing in the shade. A second image, taken approximately 9 seconds later, showed the same angle. The boy was no longer present. No movement appeared behind him. No figures were visible leaving the frame. Rangers walked the area again, focusing on the narrow lines where sand meets stone. These junctions often reveal scuffs or broken crust. No scuffs appeared. The sand remained unbroken in the places where a child might logically step. The sandstone shelf remained clear. All nearby brush lines were inspected, even though they stood far from the arch. No disturbance. As darkness approached, the search leader ended the first operational period. The final entry notes that the child was last confirmed standing near the shaded boulder at the base of the arch, and that no ground sign indicated a departure route. The photographs, taken moments apart, showed no visible transition from the confirmed point to any direction. The terrain that should have shown movement remained unchanged. The second operational day in Arches National Park began under clear, dry air. Morning light stretched long shadows across the sandstone, but the terrain remained fully visible. Rangers assembled near the boulder where the boy had last been photographed. The sand beneath it had cooled overnight, creating a firmer top layer. Any disturbance during the night would have left visible crumbling or compression. None appeared. At 6:40, a tracking specialist examined the contact points around the boulder. He checked the transition zone where sand met stone. These edges typically show faint slides or toe marks from someone stepping upward. The specialist found no new impressions. The sand ridge nearest the boy's confirmed position held only the irregular texture left by wind. Wind patterns were consistent and showed no breaks indicating footsteps. Rangers then extended the search to the sandstone shelf behind the boulder. The surface was smooth with scattered grit. Grit shifts easily even under light pressure, leaving small arcs or streaks. The shelf showed no new streaks. The ranger documented the surface again and noted that any movement across it in the previous 12 hours should have left at least some subtle trace. None did. At 7:20, a dog team conducted a restart using a new scent article taken from the boy's inside shirt lining. The dog acquired scent clearly and moved toward the shaded patch where the child had last stood. It lowered its head, circled once tightly, stepped against the sandstone rise, and froze. The handler attempted a restart from the opposite side of the boulder. The dog repeated the same short loop and sat. The handler recorded, "No scent trail beyond initial point." Volunteers began sweeping the slope below the arch. This zone consisted of alternating sandstone sheets and small pockets of powdery sand. The powder layer was thin and easily disturbed. Volunteers examined each pocket. No small prints, no half prints, no drag lines. Only one pocket contained a faint indentation, but no tread detail. It matched neither the boy's shoe nor his approximate foot size. Logged as inconclusive. At 8:50, a ranger located a narrow crack between two sandstone plates. The crack was shallow, but long enough to hold debris. He used a flashlight to inspect the interior. Only dust and two dry leaves. No fabric, no object, no evidence someone had stepped into or crossed over the crack. When he tested the surrounding stone with his own boot, it left a clear dust scrape. No such scrape existed before testing. The helicopter unit arrived at 9:30. With the morning sun higher, shadows sharpened around the arch. The observer scanned the shelf where the boy had stood, the boulder's shaded rear, the slopes on both flanks, and the wider drainage corridor 30 yards beyond. No heat signatures, no color contrast suggesting clothing, no movement near the shrub lines. By late morning, rangers pushed farther into the open expanse behind the arch. The terrain transitioned into rolling sandstone. These surfaces often collect thin dust layers in depressions. Each depression was inspected. All were smooth, except for older boot marks from hikers days earlier. No fresh impressions consistent with a small foot. At 11:20, a pair of hikers approached the command point. They reported hearing a short sound the previous evening. "Like a quick call," one said, but could not identify direction. Rangers checked the nearest gullies and shadow pockets. The gullies contained loose sand. The sand was wind-rippled but unbroken. No smooth streaks from recent entry. No debris. By midday, rangers inspected the main trail that led back toward the parking area. The trail held hard-packed sand. A fresh track would leave crisp edges. The section nearest the arch showed dense prints from morning hikers, but none matching the boy's shoe size or tread. Several families descending the trail were questioned. None had seen a child walking alone. At 14:10, volunteers swept the higher ledges above the arch. These ledges were narrow and exposed. Any child climbing them would likely leave scuff marks or dislodged grit. The ledges showed no scuffs, no sliding gravel. The team checked behind small overhangs. No sign. As the afternoon heat intensified, the search leader ordered one final slow sweep around the shaded boulder. Rangers crawled the perimeter, checking microdepressions in the sand. They inspected the underside of the rock where dust collects in thin sheets. All undisturbed. No marks. No displaced grains. No imprint consistent with a child kneeling, stepping, or crawling. At 16:50, the helicopter made a last pass along the ridge. Visibility remained high. The observer reported the same result as earlier. No trace. By 17:40, the second operational period closed. The final log entry states that all probable and extended routes had been searched with no evidence of movement from the last confirmed point. The sand had held no prints. The rock had held no scuffs. The photographs remained the only confirmed record. One image showing the child present, the next showing an unchanged background with the child absent. The final case in this series comes from Shenandoah National Park. The incident occurred during early evening hours at a small campground positioned between two ridges. The terrain there is mixed, sections of packed soil, patches of fallen leaves, and clusters of low brush. Visibility changes depending on angle and light, but at the time of the disappearance, the area remained evenly lit by sunset glow. Multiple families occupied nearby sites. A steady quiet settled across the loop as most visitors prepared dinner. The child in this file was 9 years old. He had been helping his parents arrange their gear when he asked to walk to a nearby water spigot roughly 20 paces from their tent. The spigot stood in an open patch of ground between two small maples. According to the parents, he had walked there alone before, and they could see the spigot clearly from their fire ring. They allowed him to go, telling him to return immediately. At 1841, the boy walked toward the spigot. Leaves shifted under his feet. The father said he watched him cross the small clearing and step into the light patch around the spigot. The boy lifted the handle and ran the water for several seconds. The father looked down to adjust a cooking pot. When he looked up again, the patch around the spigot was empty. The water continued to run. The boy was not in view. At first, the parents assumed he had moved behind one of the maples to look at something on the ground. They called his name. No answer. They walked to the spigot. The water had overflowed into a small muddy band beneath the handle. The mud showed one clear print from the boy's shoe directly beneath the valve. Beyond that single print, no other impressions extended in any direction. A neighboring camper reported hearing water running, but did not see the boy approach or leave. Another camper seated near a lantern said she believed she saw a shape moving near the spigot, but could not confirm it was a child. When pressed, she said the movement lasted less than a second. At 19:04, a ranger arrived. He documented the single print beneath the valve. The print was clean, depth consistent with a child's weight. The mud surrounding the print held tiny rivulets from the running water. None of the rivulets crossed an outgoing step. The ranger noted that if the child had walked away from the spigot, his step should have left at least one partial impression across the wet soil. None existed. Rangers checked the leaves immediately beyond the muddy band. Leaves collect slight depressions from recent travel. None appeared. The bed of leaves held natural scattering from wind earlier in the afternoon, but no clear path or channel indicated movement. A ranger knelt and shifted several leaves to verify. Soil beneath them was undisturbed. At 19:29, the dog team arrived. They used a scent article taken from the inside of the boy's jacket. The dog acquired scent immediately and pulled toward the spigot. It sniffed the single print, stepped outward, paused, and circled. The handler attempted a restart from the opposite side of the clearing. The dog returned to the same point and sat. The handler recorded no extension of scent trail beyond primary print. Volunteers began checking the brush surrounding the clearing. The brush was light and would normally show snapped tips or bent stems if someone moved quickly through it. No broken stems, no dragged branches. A few small animal trails crossed the area, but all were old and narrow. None matched the width of a child pushing through. At 20:08, the helicopter unit flew a short pass over the ridgeline. Low light made shadows deep, but heat contrast remained strong. The observer scanned the clearing, the slopes behind it, and the tree clusters. No heat signature matching a small human appeared. The helicopter widened the scan. All negative. Rangers then checked the service path leading away from the loop. The path held packed soil. Even small feet leave rounded impressions on that surface. The path held only adult prints and a few bicycle tracks. No prints of a child's size. By 2100 hours, night had fully set in. Lanterns illuminated tent sites across the loop. Rangers walked between each site, confirming no one had found a wandering child. Parents repeated that they had watched him step into the visible patch near the spigot. He had not been out of sight long enough to travel beyond any point already scanned. The first operational period closed with the same unresolved detail that began it. A single clear print beneath the water handle, and no sign of travel in any direction from that point. The water had continued to run until the father shut it off. The ground remained silent beyond that one print. The second operational day in Shenandoah opened under a pale layer of morning fog. The campground remained quiet. Moisture clung to the tents and leaves, but visibility across the clearing was stable. Rangers returned to the water spigot, marking it again as the last confirmed point. The single print beneath the valve had softened overnight, but retained its outline. No new impressions had appeared in the mud or in the surrounding leaves. At 6:40, a tracking specialist expanded the perimeter. He examined the leaf bed extending outward from the spigot. Leaves that had absorbed moisture overnight were more sensitive to pressure. Any recent footfall would create a distinct darkening. The specialist found no such patterns. He lifted leaf clusters at regular intervals. The soil below remained even and unbroken. Rangers then checked the 2 maples framing the spigot area. The bark around the trunks showed no fresh scrapes. Low branches beneath arm height often catch clothing fibers. None were present. The ground beneath the branches was bare in several spots, but held no prints. The ranger reviewing those spots noted that the moisture should have recorded compressions clearly. None appeared. At 7:10, the dog team conducted a full restart using a second scent article from the child's sleeping bag. The dog acquired scent near the family's tent, moved to the clearing, and approached the spigot. It circled twice, paused at the muddy print, then stepped backward and sat. The handler logged again. No extension of scent trail. Volunteers were assigned to sweep the slope behind the campground. The slope was a mixture of packed soil and shallow carpet of leaves. Both would show new movement. The volunteers walked slowly, checking tree wells and depressions. A few old deer tracks crossed the area, but none of the impressions were small enough to match a human child. The slope held no recent disturbance. By 8:30, the helicopter unit flew a second pass. Morning sunlight cut through the fog, improving thermal contrast. The observer scanned the clearing, the road leading out of the campground, and the low ravine 50 yards beyond. No heat signatures matching a child appeared. The helicopter then followed the ridgeline north before returning. All negative. Around 9:50, a ranger re-examined a shallow drainage trench running parallel to the campground road. The trench held damp soil, thin puddles, and scattered leaf debris. Any recent step would leave visible sinking. None of the puddles showed displaced sediment. The leaves in the trench had settled naturally overnight, forming smooth clusters without any breaks. At 10:22, a volunteer found a small depression near a stump at the edge of the clearing. The depression was faint and round, missing any distinct tread. The ranger measured it against the boy's shoe pattern and determined it was larger and likely caused by falling debris. Logged as inconclusive. Rangers extended the search to the road access area. The road held soft dust from the previous day's traffic. The dust preserved early hiker prints, but showed none matching the boy. They checked culverts running beneath the road. No debris, no clothing. The log records all culverts as clear. By midday, the search leader ordered a wide grid sweep from the clearing outward. Volunteers maintained equal spacing through low brush and open soil. They checked behind each log, under fallen branches, and within shallow pits created by old root systems. All negative. In early afternoon, the search returned again to the spigot. The ranger assigned to the final inspection checked the muddy band under the handle a third time. The print's outline remained visible. It showed a clean entry and no departing step. The water valve still had residual moisture on its underside. Drops fell slowly into the mud. No rivulet led outward. A brief meeting followed at 15:30. Rangers reviewed each probable path. Every route presented the same contradiction. The boy had been visible at the spigot moments before his disappearance. No time gap existed in which he could have moved far, and yet no track, no leaf shift, no scent line, and no witness indicated a direction. As the second operational period neared its end, the helicopter unit conducted one final pass. The observer scanned the clearing in full sunlight. No anomalies appeared. The ridge to the west remained quiet. No heat traces below the trees. The team reported negative findings. At 17:14, the search leader closed the operation. The final log entry summarizes the elements consistent across all files in the case group. A last confirmed point, ground that should have shown movement but did not, and a disappearance occurring within a window too brief to account for distance. The spigot print remained the only physical evidence. No path extended from it. The file closes with no direction established and no resolution indicated.